Hi, my name's Tegan. I'm one of the owners here at Jacobs Trading. Today we're actually going to be talking about ruby versus garnet and how to tell them apart. So to start, we're going to be talking about what exactly ruby and garnet are. We're going to start with ruby. Ruby is actually a type of corundum. Corundum is an aluminum oxide with a hardness of 9, and it's a family of minerals that mostly contains rubies and sapphires. Rubies are the pink and red variety. Sapphires are actually every other color. And this can be blues and greens and yellows, every other shade, and actually sometimes they even call a pink sapphire, which I'm not 100% sure why they always do that. So next we're going to be talking about garnets. Garnets are from the silicate family, and they actually come also in an array of different colors, not just that nice crimson red that you're used to seeing. Garnets are actually a hardness of about a 6.5 to a 7.5. So this can actually be your first clue as to telling the two apart is by doing a scratch test of hardness, because rubies are actually a 9 on the Mohs hardness scale, which is much, much harder. But we're gonna get into telling you some more visual details in case you don't wanna actually damage your piece by scratching it. So first thing we're gonna look at is color. So this is probably the hardest thing to tell the difference between the two because obviously they are very similar colors, particularly in the polished form when you're looking at the most traditional style color, which is that nice rich red color. But there is a little bit of differences. So the one on this side is the garnet and this side is the ruby. Ruby, you get a little bit more of that kind of pinkish color, and garnets you get a much deeper, almost going to a black kind of color. And this is actually a raw ruby, which is getting that nice pink tone, just not as common to see. These are kind of your most common colors. So slightly more pinky, probably a ruby, slightly darker, rich red, more black, probably a garnet. The next thing we're going to be talking about is shape. We're going to start with the polished form. So when they're polished, garnets are a cheaper stone, so a lot of times how they're done is in a tumbler. And so that when they're beat around like this in a tumbler, the shape can be created by itself. So a lot of times they're just a round shape. Whereas rubies are a more expensive stone, so they're actually done by hand. So you're going to see these larger sweeping faces and flat spots where somebody's actually putting it in a grinder and grinding it by hand themselves as opposed to a tumbler choosing the shape. So you're going to see kind of like squished flat faces. You can see this one has a face here and a nice drawing edge across here. This is your first visual clue in a polished shape. Now we're going to show you raw. So rubies tend to have a 6-sided shape, whereas garnets are actually, in more technical terms, a rhombic dodecahedron. So in more easier terms, it's a 12-sided shape with a rhombic face, so a diamond-shaped face. Rubies have that 6-sided shape, but they're actually in a column, so they're grown in a nice long tube, and then you see that 6-sided shape on the end. Okay, one of the last things we're going to show you to talk about is actually the texture of the stone. So if you remember how we talked about the different polishing methods between ruby versus garnet, this is another feature, is actually just the texture on the stone. Because garnets are tumbled instead of hand polished, you get a more rough finish sometimes. Now this can depend on the piece. There are occasionally exceptions to the rule where garnets are hand polished, but a lot of times they're not. So you can see these kind of lines that are going through the stone. Also, because of the shape where you get that kind of ball shape with a garnet, you're going to get those grooves in between. So you're going to see a lot more creases in the stones in between. Whereas ruby, because it's a much denser stone, there's less of these grooves. So you're always going to see a much more smooth sheen to that finish in a tumbled stone. When you're looking at the raw, it's a little bit harder to see sometimes, but one clue is going to be in the raw ruby is triangles. So it might be hard to see on the camera, but there is actually triangles that you can see. So if you get it under a good light and shine it a little bit, you might see triangle shapes. This is going to tell you for sure that it's a corundum or a ruby. Whereas garnets, they're much more kind of chunky and they get kind of like these flat faces that you might see. A lot of times they're kind of shiny. You get kind of like a gold tone to it in certain spots. This is kind of like a rusty texture in there. That's going to show you that it's actually a garnet, not a ruby. And actually a lot of times garnet's paired with mica. So if you see this kind of shiny spot here, that's telling you also that it could be a garnet. So the last real fun way to tell the difference between rubies and garnets, if you're looking at them, rubies are fluorescent. So if you shine a fluorescent light on them, they will glow. That's all we have for you today, guys. If you like what you saw, be sure to come check us out here at 1600 Regent Avenue West in Winnipeg, Manitoba. If you're not from the area, we do have an actual wonderful online store that you can check that out here. If you like what you saw here today on our video, we also have a YouTube channel, and you can follow us and like more of our content on there. Cheers, have a great rest of your day.